and welcome to the F1 Report. F1 returns to the Shanghai circuit in a few days' time for round 3 of the 2016 season. And joining me to discuss all the talking points ahead of the Chinese Grand Prix are former F1 driver John Watson and F1 historian and author Roger Smith. John, welcome back. Good to see you. It's been a while. How are you?
I'm always available.
Available for selection. And here you are. All good?
Yes, everything's good. Yeah, great season. 2 races down, 1 to go this weekend. Lots of anomalies, I think, in Shanghai.
Plenty to get our teeth into. So what have you made of 2016 so far, Roger?
Well, I think it's a promising season. I think with Lewis on the back foot, we are obviously going to see him battle back shortly. And you never know with the Ferraris. They're not quite there yet, but could be interesting.
Absolutely. More of that soon. Plenty to discuss. Here is what's coming up on the show. With a political landscape filled with feuds in F1, we discuss the power struggles currently affecting the sport. Could there be a driver strike on the horizon? We ask the opinion of John, who was part of a boycott in the 1982 San Marino Grand Prix. And we look at some of the proposed new changes for 2017 and what they could mean for the sport. But let's start with qualifying, which will return back to the 2015 format when we get to China after the much maligned elimination style was finally dropped. So common sense prevailing there, John?
Kind of. I mean, the trouble is, going back, I'm not a big fan of, but what we had in 16 hasn't worked as it was intended to work. So pressure, and I think public opinion possibly as well, has forced the FIA, the governing body of Formula One and motorsport, to take a step back. I would now ask the teams to play their role and use the opportunities that they've got. They're going to have an extra set of tyres, I'm assuming, because they got an extra set in Bahrain. If that extra set is available, don't hold it back for your advantage on Sunday. Use it and give the public something to enjoy.
Well, Roger, they're calling it the 2015 format, but just remind us when the Q1, Q2, Q3 format came in and how it was perceived at the time.
Yes, it came in, it was called the knockout qualifying at the time, and it came in 2006. This is coming into its 11th year, and it actually was extremely popular. It was regarded as a refreshing new approach to qualifying, following 3 years of a rather tedious system where it was a single lap qualifying. So you had cars going out one at a time and being timed over a single lap, and originally actually they were timed over 2 laps, which are added together, which of course is one of the controversial aspects of the latest proposals. So generally speaking, it was regarded as a good approach, and you have to question quite why we've gone into this question over the qualifying system when actually it was working really quite well.
So in your mind it was working well then. How about you, John?
I think it worked fundamentally, but of course what teams will do is do everything that they can do to give them an advantage in the race. And unfortunately, again, we're seeing this one team domination. And quite often a team that might be just sneaking into the top 10 might opt to do just an in and an out lap and not record a time, and again save tyres that they will use to an advantage come the Grand Prix on the Sunday. So I've put the onus now on the teams to remember they're not there just to serve themselves, they're there to serve the public.
What about the drivers giving their opinion? Jacques Villeneuve has told them they need to just shut up and get on with it. Being a fairly opinionated man yourself, how do you feel? I
think he was being very polite in the way he sort of gave his opinion. I mean, frankly, Grand Prix drivers are lazy. All they do is work at a weekend. They put together a letter. Alex Wurz is now the chairman or president of the so-called GPDA. They're stating the obvious. I mean, and what Jacques has said in his comments is basically right. You know, I just want drivers to do what they're good at doing and leave the other bits of Formula One to the people that manage it very well. Now, if they want to get involved, instead of going off to the nearest tattoo parlour to get the latest tattoo or going out with some stick insect of a model, then get involved. Maybe try to find a way to have driver representation on the World Motorsport Council, for example, where they can make a proper contribution. But, you know, constructing a letter like that, posting it, sending it to Bernie, no wonder, you know, it was a joke.
You say that it's being governed well as a sport. Would you agree with that? Because I know plenty of fans wouldn't.
Well, I'd just like to sort of say something on behalf of the drivers, actually, because I don't think John represents that necessarily how things are today, because the driver's opinion really seems to revolve largely around the fact that they're not being stimulated by the form of racing which is going on at the present time. And I like to hear that view, because I would imagine when you were driving, John, you thoroughly enjoyed the process, and although there were occasions when you had to sort of save fuel and save tyres and all the rest of it, that's always been part of Formula One. Perhaps there's too much of that at the present time, and I think that that's possibly what the driver's aggravation is really about.
I mean, there's an element of truth, but at the same time, what we've got today is progress. Now, progress isn't always better, or my generation of Formula One, I think, was a great time, but it doesn't mean that it was better. It was just what it was at the time. And there are reasons why what we have now is in place. And without going into the litany of all the reasons, the changes that we're going to go back to for the 2015 qualifying, I hope we'll see an improvement in qualifying. But it comes back again, principally, the teams have got to make it work. If they want to be in the entertainment business, it says on the lid, motor racing, not self-interest.
Cast your mind back to 1982. You were part of a boycott when you were driving for McLaren. It wasn't your decision to boycott the San Marino Grand Prix, but it was the team's. Tell us how that worked.
That was primarily a battle between the governing body of motorsport, which at that time was headed by the president, Jean-Marie Balest, and the Formula One teams that were being represented by Bernie Ecclestone and, in part, Max Mosley. And it was a battle of who was going to be the controlling party of Formula One. And both sides of the argument, it got very tense. And ultimately, in San Marino, the Grand Prix, it was only the manufacturing teams, plus Tyrrell and one or two of the smaller teams, that fell into line and took part in the Grand Prix. The majority of the independent teams, that what I would call the owner-driver teams, like Williams and McLaren, Brabham and others, they boycotted that Grand Prix. It wasn't pretty, but that was the decision at that time.
As a historian of the sport, has it always been this politicised? It's nothing new, is it?
It isn't. John's referring to the FISA-FOCA wars of that period, which was probably one of the most difficult times for Formula One in many ways. But subsequent to that, when Max Mosley took over from Jean-Marie Balestre, you had controversy of all sorts, attempts to break away by the teams and form Grand Prix World Championship and so forth and so on. So there's always been this frisson between the teams and the governing body. And of course it's been added to of late by the commercial rights holder as well, being a third stakeholder in the whole process. And you can go back to earlier times. In the 50s, the introduction of avgas, aviation fuel, as opposed to alcohol-based fuels, created all sorts of havoc by the governing body, and the teams, found it very difficult, particularly the British teams. And then in 1961, the introduction of the 1.5 litre formula as well. The British team said, no, we want to carry on with the old 2 litre formula, and so on. So you can go back through the decades.
It
always was that.
I'm sure. But bringing it up to the here and now, can you see a situation where there could be a boycott, where the drivers could strike now? Because I know there's often threats of it, but will we actually see it?
Well,
too much at stake, isn't it?
I think not. I mean, in the final analysis, the drivers are part of the team, and therefore, for them to strike means they're letting down a lot of people in their team who are working very hard.
And the fans.
For them, exactly. So I think that's most unlikely. I mean, the closest thing we've had to a few teams pulling out, I think, was a year or two back when Lotus, as then, Sauber and Force India were beginning to sort of threaten that perhaps they wouldn't compete. That was, of course,
Bahrain, wasn't it?
For financial reasons.
OK, well, we've discussed the past and the present of F1. Now for the future. In the statement released by the FIA last Thursday, the governing body announced that F1 would revert to the 2015 qualifying format in the interests of the championship from the Chinese Grand Prix onwards. The statement concluded by saying Jean Todt and Bernie Ecclestone welcomed the idea put forward by the teams to have a global assessment of the format of the weekend for 2017. So how do we see F1's weekend format shaping up for 2017, Roger?
Well, I think that's probably the one positive thing that's come out from the fiasco, spelled F-I-A, ASCO. And that is that there is now going to be a proper examination of the Grand Prix weekend, the 3-day excuse me, weekend of the Friday, the Saturday and the Sunday. And that, to my mind, is positive, because I would like to see a change in the amount of time, track time that is, between practice and track action in terms of competition. At the present time, you've got 3 hours on Friday, you've got another hour of free practice on the Saturday. That's 4 hours of practicing, which is not necessarily that entertaining from the spectator point of view. And then you've got 1 hour of qualifying and 1.5 hours for the race. So you've got 2.5 hours of track action in terms of competition. And I would like to see us get into the situation where we retain Friday for practice. We don't do anything to the race. I think the race format is fine, but I think we should change Saturday, and the question of a sprint race comes up, which I think could contribute valuably to a new approach to establish the grid, because this idea of putting the fastest cars at the front of the grid does inevitably create a situation where, according to my figures, 2/3 of every single race has been won from the front of the grid on the front row.
Yeah, absolutely. I mean, you'd have to say, with the mounting races in the season, 21, obviously, when you only have to cast your mind back to 1996, and just 16 races, does it mean that because you're seeing so much more action through the year, you could drop Friday practice?
The bottom line is going to be costs. If they're going to propose something and implement it, it's got to be at least no more than it is currently, and ideally less. And remember, we've got restriction on engines. We've got 5 engines for 21 races this year, and 6 race gearboxes, limited sets of tyres. Teams outside of possibly the top 3 are running on very, very little budgets. It's not a good situation right now. There needs to be a much broader view of what we do to make Formula One where we can see more cars running more of the time at less money. In other words, the phenomenally successful engineering engines that we've got, these hybrid engines, genius engines, but actually doesn't make Formula One any better than a more simple, more affordable engine power unit. And I think that that's where the FIA has to focus. Personally, I don't have a problem with having a 2-day Grand Prix. I get involved in other motorsport events, which are 2-day events, and they run extremely successfully. But there's a lot more time and availability to spend on practicing before you get into qualifying on the Saturday. So dropping Friday would mean a loss to Sky, for example, 1 day less of Formula One on screen for your subscribers to enjoy. I don't know how they would feel about it. But if that's the route that Formula One feels is the right route, I wouldn't object to it.
OK. Well, that's all we've got time for in part 1. Join us after the break as we look at the regulation changes proposed for 2017 and their effects on F1 as we currently know it. See you after the break. Hello and welcome back to the F1 Report. In part 1, we discussed the driver boycott that John took part in the 1982 season. Keke Rosberg won his only Drivers' Championship that very year. So can his son Nico go on to do the same 34 years later, amid similar off-track disputes and distractions? He certainly started this season very well with 2 victories, Roger. Can you see him making a hat-trick in China? You've obviously got to consider that Lewis has won a record 4 times there. How do you think he'll fare in Shanghai? Well,
clearly he's still in a great car, and he has every chance of winning. But I'd like to see him win with the reigning world champion getting past the first corner, which has knocked him back 5 or 6 places each time in the last race. And I'd also like to see a clean race from Ferrari, because we don't still know about the Ferrari threat. Is it a real or just a mirage? I think that Bahrain might well give answers to both of those things, and then we'll see whether Nico is really quite up to the task as an open goal did in the last race.
Yeah, I mean, he certainly capitalised on Lewis's mistakes. Do you think that it's just the starts that have let Lewis down? Do you think there are any other chinks in his armour?
Difficult to tell, because the two starts definitely disadvantaged him, and I think he's put his hand up and said that I didn't make the best of the starts. His teammate did better, and Ferrari clearly in Australia had phenomenal starts, and in Bahrain Ferrari, had it not been for Vettel's failure, may well have challenged Mercedes, or certainly forced them into running at a higher pace. I think what Mercedes are able to do is run at a pace that they need to do, relevant to the opposition that they're having to deal with.
And Lewis has picked up on something fairly significant. The fact that there's an 80-second gap between first and seventh, that doesn't seem right, does it? And does that basically tell us there's just going to be just as dominant a season for Mercedes again this year, which will be disappointing for the fans?
I don't think between first and seventh, 80 seconds is particularly strange. I mean, if you look back at Grand Prix racing over the decades, even over recent history, that sort of difference is fairly typical. I mean, you used to get situations where the likes of Fangio and Clark would lap the whole field, so we've perhaps moved on a little bit from there. Indeed, if you look at the information carefully, you can see that the gaps between podium positions have closed up considerably in recent time, but it's not until you really get to the few tenths of a second that you get, you know, those terrific races, but there is so few and far between. No, I think the problem, obviously, is the fact that you've had a period of a couple of seasons with Mercedes winning all but 6 of the races. And I think last season it was a little tedious because Hamilton got a good start to begin with and just kept on going. This year, though, I think we've already seen, because of the starting procedures and so on, that he's not in the right position initially, and therefore we've got to see him catch up, and I think that will add the sort of level of interest and excitement we'd had in 2014, which I thought was a terrific year.
And no doubt, as you've touched on, Roger, Ferrari, reliability issues aside, will start coming good. I mean, Toto Wolff has referenced it himself. We don't know their true colours just yet. And when we do, they could put up a real fight.
I think that's probably true, but I think also it's probably true that Toto Wolff doesn't want to highlight just how much performance they may still have in hand. And we've not yet seen how much performance they've got in hand, because I do believe they run to the pace that they need to beat the opposition as it stands, not to go and show us the ultimate pace of the car and the team.
Yeah.
So until that arises, and whether it'll happen in China or not is another matter, but right now I find it hard to see any team challenging on a consistent race-by-race basis the dominance that we've seen from Rosberg and Hamilton.
OK, well now new regulations are set to be introduced for 2017, which will see an even bigger increase in speed by up to 5 seconds. Rosberg is fearful that the downforce needed to achieve this will affect overtaking, which is already a problem. But Roger, you were fearful of the 2017 regulations. Why is that?
I think perhaps people are taking their eye off the ball a little bit. In their third season, these turbo hybrids are really getting very quick indeed. We've had Hamilton on pole in both the first two races, 2.5 seconds quicker than his pole lap a year ago in Melbourne. I think it was virtually 3 seconds in Bahrain. Now those are huge increases in performance 1 year to the last, and we're getting now to the situation where these cars are becoming the fastest Formula 1 cars we've ever seen. They may not make a lot of noise, but they sure are quick, and they accelerate like bats out of hell as well. So these are fabulous creatures. I love the technology personally. I think it's marvellous, and what concerns me is the fact that they're saying that the 2017 regulations are to increase the speed of Formula 1 cars by another 2, 3, 4 seconds. I mean, they were talking of 5 to 7 seconds at one point. Now, they've already, just by their natural development, taken off 2 or 3 seconds a lap this year, and by the end of the full development this season, I don't know what they'll be getting up to. And it does seem to me that if you've got this sort of level of performance increase into next season on top of this season, you're getting to extraordinary speeds, And I think that there is a certain amount of complacency, perhaps, that speed and safety and danger and so on do go hand in hand, and that this should be thought about.
Is faster always better?
Well, if you think back to 2004, the lap times, top speeds, cornering speeds of the Grand Prix cars of that period in many circuits still exist. The lap records, Michael Schumacher particularly, Juan Pablo Montoya, those cars were the quickest Grand Prix cars in over a decade. And we're just seeing now at Bahrain, where for the first time in, I think, 12 years, that Lewis's pole position eclipsed that time. Is that progress? 12 years. Everything has been done in Formula One to slow the cars down. Aerodynamics have been reduced. We've got, in 2016, a third tyre choice. We've got a super soft tyre. So that's another factor in moving forward. The fact that the engines, or the hybrid units that they're now using, are capable of generating close to 1,000 horsepower. Well, the 3.5-litre V10 engines of 2004 were producing not far short of that, and were eminently more drivable because they had a lot less torque, and the driver could use the throttle pedal more aggressively. How Formula One wants to go forward and increase or reduce the lap time, and in other words, go quicker, is fundamentally by aerodynamics. And the problem with aerodynamics is, I think the aerodynamic model that Formula One has been following for many decades now is flawed. And all you have to do is look at the front of a current Grand Prix car, and frankly, it's a mess. But for the engineers who are designing it, it's a work of art. It is phenomenal engineering. But then turn one in Bahrain, a minor collision between Bottas and Lewis Hamilton damaged part of the front wing, the end plate and other parts of the aerodynamics, and had an effect. I just think the cars are plain ugly, and I don't think it's the right way forward to further develop the aerodynamics around that current aerodynamic concept. Personally, I'd rather see cars go back, and I don't think going back's always correct either. But the car that was raced in the sort of ground effect era, where the bulk of the aerodynamics came from within the wheelbase through a Venturi, we also had sliding skirts, but the bulk of the downforce came through the Venturi. We got to a point in, I think, 1982, where we weren't even running a front wing in our car because there was sufficient aerodynamics throughout the length of the car within the wheelbase that we didn't need to have a front wing. We had a clean, pretty simple rear wing. I think aesthetically, the cars were much more attractive, and they were less inclined to be damaged in very, very minor contacts, which we're seeing consistently, particularly in the opening laps these days.
OK, so ugly and vulnerable in your mind. OK, cost-cutting and distribution of wealth are still prevalent for teams in F1. Ahead of China, it's been reported that Ferrari are set to receive their usual premium payment for being the sport's oldest team. The Italian outfit will reportedly receive $192 million, despite finishing second to Mercedes in 2015, who are set to receive just a mere $171 million. So, Roger, just explain to us, you've obviously researched Ferrari's entire F1 career. Are they good value for money?
Well, I think that a lot of people would say, can you have Formula One without Ferrari? And I think that that is the question. They've been a feature ever since the beginning, and they've been a major competitor very often. You know, sort of there have been periods when they haven't been up there, but that sort of aspect of Formula One is important. But there again, you know, I don't think that any team is bigger than Formula One, in my opinion. I don't think any driver or race, for that matter, is bigger than Formula One. I think Formula One can and will carry on without the Ferrari in the event that we can't afford it any longer, or they, for whatever reason, pull away. But I must say that Ferrari still make the heart beat faster across the world, and therefore I would like to see them remain in Formula One. Whether it's value for money, I couldn't tell you, but to be honest with you, better in than out for them.
Absolutely. I mean, as a driver, how does it feel that Ferrari do receive, you know, 20 million extra, irrespective of where they finish the race?
Well, if you're a Ferrari driver, you're happy days, isn't it? But just to go back to the point Roger was making, Ferrari is important to Formula One, and to reflect back to the 1982 FISA FOCA war which we're talking about. And had there been a split, and had the FOCA teams gone off and done what they wanted to do as their show, they would have lost out, I think, significantly without Ferrari, because Ferrari were aligned to FISA, the governing body of motorsport at that time, and they would have not, in my view, have crossed over and joined the independent FOCA teams. And that was a big part of the decision-making for peace to be negotiated between the two parties to enable Formula One to continue as a unified sport.
So in both your minds, Roger, the balance of power and the distribution of wealth doesn't need to be readdressed?
Oh, no, I think it definitely does. You asked me if Ferrari's value for money, and that was the question I couldn't necessarily answer. But I think the redistribution of wealth within Formula One has got to be addressed. I think the problem is we seem to be locked into a system which has got to go on until 2020, unless, of course, the EU step in and question the validity of the contracts that have been established. And I wish they would, to be quite honest, because I would
Well, Roger,
tear them
where's
up.
your vote going to go on the 24th of June, then?
Well,
whatever you do, don't make it on the 24th, because you missed it by a day.
23rd?
23rd.
Is it really?
Yeah. Listen, guys, it's been great to see you both. Thank you very much for joining us. That is all we've got time for this week's show. My great thanks to John and Roger for joining me. We'll be back on Wednesday to review the Chinese Grand Prix, and we'll see who can secure success in Shanghai. Bye-bye for now.
Enjoy Sky Sports F1 Live on all screens, on the go, and the best bits on demand.